and yet many people in his professional and social circles thought this was a bad move, and it really did not hold true to religious values. Major internal conflict for this poor guy, and yet he continued on and obviously worked towards the notion that sports could indeed build moral fiber and moral character.
Yeah, along those lines, I was thinking too, it was my understanding that he wouldn't have agreed with what Fog Allen did in nature of competition becoming aggressive. I don't think his record at KU was all that good, and he was all about getting exercise and not necessarily winning, which there again is more the Christian ideal, whereas competition anymore, it's almost synonymous with aggression and in your face and combativeness, and those are sort of...
Morals and ethics don't seem to mesh well with that aggressive competition and combat. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and so I think it's not too far out of bounds to say he'd be rolling over in his grave if he saw modern day basketball and what's happening with it.
In fact, I think that our younger siblings down I-70 have a football coach that would agree with that from and was just quoted perhaps last week in saying that we are, what was the word he used? I'm not going to remember it, but the notion of athletics has become such a big business that it's very different. Now, I think perhaps Naismith would argue that bringing our children up in athletics and hoping that some of the coaches and parents of those who are young athletes are still working on this notion of teamwork and leadership and things that are very good about the game.
Is he talking about the money aspect of it that he doesn't like?
Are you saying would Naismith like the money aspect of it? I will say that he considers his crowning achievement getting basketball involved in the Olympics. And while that may not have been directly linked to money, I think he understood that the growth of a sport, it doesn't happen without an audience.
Right.
So there are, gosh, there's so many things we could talk about in that degree.
I think it's useful to understand that Naismith was also a practicing physician. He was hired at the university as the chaplain, and not too many years after he came here, basketball in many respects was very secondary in his life. What was primary in his life was the chaplain, being a chaplain and being a physical education director. He did a lot of research in and around that. And so he really, the whole business about basketball and its explosion probably gets transferred to Fog Allen as the father of coaching, who really made basketball grow. But for most of Naismith's time in Lawrence, basketball was a kind of an interesting secondary thing for him. He was very devoted to the chaplaincy.
Never made any money on it.
No,
we even talked about foreclosure on a house here and there.
Yep.
And certainly there's lots of stories about Naismith and Allen having kind of tumultuous relationship.
I just want to add one other thing. I used to have a rather extensive Naismith collection, one of which was a handwritten essay that he wrote on what's the matter with athletics, and a 10-page piece.
What year, Dennis?
1929, 30.
Okay.
Right in there. And I'm trying to do a paper on it right now. But in that essay, he makes a point that would support what he's talking about. That the commercial aspect of basketball was something that he wouldn't have probably rolled over in his grave, but it certainly wasn't where he would have put his emphasis. It really was about sport and about Christian muscularity and about enhancing the body and physical education.
His research also is a very interesting topic. It really, it kind of hits home this notion that I do want young people to focus on athletics and understand teamwork and mind and body. But it's pretty clear that he would not have taken a path of being an athletics promoter.
But as a student at McGill, he was a very, very aggressive football player.
That's an important distinction. He was competitive. This was not, and what we do hear a lot about how this is the only KU coach with a losing record. Boy, I wish you guys could see pictures of that first gym. We did not have a home court advantage in the late 1800s. So, in fact, many of Naismith's teams played their games away. And that certainly would contribute to the record. But it is also accurate to say that he was more focused on the sport itself than the wins or the losses. And that his contemporary Fog Allen was more focused on how we can be a more successful team. Bill?
First of all, netball is based on basketball. I know because I texted KU Info and asked them.
Wahoo! Did you know you could text KU Info?
Second,
That's awesome.
I watched your movie about the rules where it explains about those first games and why he invented the sport to begin with, because the students were brawling in the halls.
Yes. Well, and that's a really good point. And for some of you, this will be a refresher, but this was the Northeast, and regularly these football and rugby players were forced indoors for months at a time, and they got very antsy, and cabin fever was probably an epidemic, perhaps. And he had an administrator who said, look, we're having a really tough time with this one particular class. There are 18 men, and they're just getting at each other and very anxious, and I'm going to give you 2 weeks to create a sport that they can play during the winter. And just a moment, he barely made it. And in fact, in his autobiography, he talks about saying, I don't know what to do, let's play football indoors, let's play soccer indoors. It didn't work at all. And yet, the day that he introduced basketball, that very first game, they beat the heck out of each other. And he, this professor that's working on this book that I referenced earlier was the one that found this audio that you hear when you go and visit the rules. And in that audio, Naismith says, one guy was knocked out, many of them had black eyes, and one had a dislocated shoulder. That was the first game. And so these rules had to be more strongly represented, perhaps. And he says now, what do the first 13 rules say about dribbling the basketball?
You can't.
Nothing. It's not even an option. Because if I am going to create this indoor game, I don't want you to tackle each other. So we are not going to be allowed to run with the ball.
Oh, no.
The moment that you can move in possession of this ball, your teammates are going to beat the heck out of each other. And then the other element of this game that was very important was, I'm not going to let you throw or hit or kick the ball as hard as you can. At the moment you do that, it's more of an outdoor sport. In fact, before he created basketball, when they tried soccer inside, and if you are ever to see pictures of this very first gym in Springfield, full of windows. Not quite as many as in the DeBruce Center, but full of windows. And he was desperately afraid that he was going to tear up this gym if they were kicking or throwing or hitting the ball as hard as they could. So again, perhaps another sub-story, but the notion of lofting the ball into a basket that is above your head was extraordinarily intentional in his original plans. He even describes the notion of, maybe we should, he says, I love lacrosse, probably one of his favorite games. And in lacrosse, you have a goal like you do in soccer, but is it the same size as a soccer goal? It's minute in comparison, and he's still afraid that trying to make a goal on the ground is going to enhance the chances of beating each other up. And it's just funny to look at those rules from the perspective of, here's a guy that's writing these things down to keep people from beating each other up. It really was intentional. Dribbling did not become a part of basketball until it was either 6 or 7 years after the original game was created. Do you have a question, Paul?
My grandfather in 1992, he lived in Western Massachusetts, and Nate Smith took him and a bunch of other guys across Canada.
In the early 1900s?
Yeah,
Like a
around
barnstorming tour?
A barnstorming tour across Canada around 1919.
You know, you mentioned that. It's interesting to note, and there are some exhibits to this extent in the center, but that, you know, there were also elements of Naismith that were military focused, and even though he was a Canadian citizen, he served in the Mexican-American War and in World War I, had to jump through significant hoops. Sorry, that was not intended.
Yeah.
I'll have to change that in any case. He did have to jump through hoops, but he became a member of the U.S. military in World War I and was in France, and not necessarily on the front lines, but there's some documentation to the extent that from his background as a YMCA, not a YMCA instructor, but someone whose focus in teaching was to build moral fiber and character, he was asked by the military to do just this for these young soldiers, and to be with these folks that were on the front line and keep them, at least to a certain extent, as accountable during wartime as they were during peacetime. And it's a really interesting element that this happened while he was at Kansas. So here's a fellow that, you know, while Fog Allen gets a lot of credit for thinking globally and building this athletics empire, Naismith had some really significant activities and growth-related vision. Any other questions? This is so much more fun than just verbalizing. Yes.
This is just a curiosity. I know the contractor who built the DeBruce, and so I got a chance to be in the DeBruce Center about 5 times over the course of its being built, and it was astounding to see the end product. But I am curious about how does the building work? Does the building work well? Because when you first see it, it's like, wait a minute, this is like chaos in here. But as it came together, it started to make sense. But I'd be curious about how you sense it works, the building works.
A wonderful question. One that will probably continue to be answered long after I'm done.
Yeah.
However, when you know, you got perspective on it and it being created and seeing some of the, you know, you go to the inside, there are no internal walls.
Right.
This is a glass shell, and everything else in this building is very open, even to the extent that they chose to have a system that hangs the 3rd level rather than supporting it on internal pillars. And I've had many people up there saying, gosh, this is a little reminiscent of the Kansas City Hotel. And thankfully we got some information from say again?
That would be true. I mean, when you see the structure, because of the way it's suspended, that would make
It's like a skywalk.
Yeah.
Yeah, you bet. And the nice thing is that many of the structural elements are visible, and you see these. I mean, you almost feel like you're on a big ship, because the structure that hangs the inside elements of the ramp and the 3rd floor are these huge industrial pieces of equipment that make you feel a little more comfortable that they did their due diligence and that it's a solid structure. But that wasn't really your question. Your question is, how's the flow? How does you know, do the visitors get what they need? And
Can space work out well?
does the space work out? And again, if you want a big open space, it's almost a guarantee that you're going to lose a little functionality. You know, any of our buildings on campus, the gorgeous new business school has this massive open space that I think some people look at and say, oh my gosh, classroom,
Right.
conference room, we missed our opportunity. And yet, in my perspective, we've got this main level, the second floor, that feels more like a hallway. And in fact, I present it as a concourse that increases your excitement as you reach the rules gallery. If that doesn't sound like an architect,
Well, and Allen Fieldhouse.
you're going towards the field house.
It's like, by the time you get to the end there, you're choked up.
I mean, can I quote you on that?
Yeah.
That's it. That's just it. There was an intentional and an architectural design and an intention to create this open circular feel that actually leads you from the front door to the gallery and extends on to the field house and provides exhibits along the way to get you to the point that if I didn't already love this program, I'm there now. And if I already loved it, then I want to hug it at this point and give it kisses. The glass exhibit that is on the first level heading towards the rules gallery has everything from Naismith working with an international team, with a group of women. It's important to note, although many of you already know this, it was days after the first game was played that a group of women at Springfield College approached Naismith and said, is this something that'd be okay for us to play? And he didn't just say, yeah, I guess so. He said, let me help you out. Let's get some space and some time. And it was encouraged. So really this was a game for men and women from the very beginning. And that's an important aspect of telling the full story. Another element that's very important that was actually just highlighted 2 weeks ago with a new Kevin Wilmot documentary, was John McClendon's story. I'll try and make this short, but this is super important. During Naismith's time, during Fog Allen's time, a gentleman came to school here who would end up not playing for the varsity basketball team, but specifically came in order to be mentored by both Naismith and Allen, and became the first African American to get a degree from the physical education department, went on to have an extraordinary coaching career, and was the first African American to coach a professional team. Now, I'm cautious because we're still making sure this is correct, but I believe that he was the first not just to coach a professional basketball team, but possibly the first African American to coach any professional sport. And this is a Jayhawk we're talking about. It would have been perhaps even the early 60s that he took on the coaching responsibilities for a predecessor to the ABA or the NBA. And John McClendon is credited for changing the game from the standpoint of four corners offense, take it slow, make sure you're doing the right thing, to this full court defense, the fast break offense. So he had a huge impact on the game, and one that cannot be separated from the story of race relations. As a Jayhawk, we should be proud of that. Yes, sir.
That, I've totally forgotten that. I can't remember the name of it. I saw a documentary recently on Naismith. Recently, it's been a couple of years, and I can't for the life of me remember where I came across it. But that was one of the things I'd forgotten about, was the McClendon. I didn't recognize the name until you started talking about it.
Well, I'm glad he was in it.
Yeah, it was awesome what they were describing.
I have a lovely story about the guy, and again, this is one that, and Kevin does a lovely job. How many have seen his movie Jayhawkers? So half dozen or so. I think lots of people thought, oh my gosh, it's a movie about Wilt Chamberlain, this is going to be awesome. Well, it was awesome, but it wasn't a story about dunks and goaltending. It was a story about his experiences when he came here and beyond. And so this documentary that he has just completed about McClendon is the same. He explains how sport had lots of things to do, both good and bad, with our challenges with diversity. One of the challenges, and this won't surprise you, was that the KU campus pool was not an integrated pool. And yet, in order to graduate with a physical education degree, one of the requirements was to pass what? Well, a swimming test. And so here's this person who was a pioneer, who was the first to do this, and was being told, you know what, you probably don't have to worry about the swim test. Just don't worry about it. It's fine. I'm sure you could pass it. Don't worry about it. Well, it was very clear to him that that was not someone saying, man, I know you're a great swimmer. You don't have to do this. This was someone saying, it might not be okay for you to use our pool. And so he was not having that, and as the story goes, he went and he swam in the pool. And as he finished, a KU staff person came and drained the pool.
That was in the documentary also.
So was it in there? Okay, it was in this one too.
I think they even interviewed him and he talked about it. They had a segment, yeah.
Well, so we can say it's fact if we heard him say it, right? Well, in any case, he approached this fellow and said, can you tell me if you're draining the pool because it's Wednesday or because I just finished swimming? And the answer was very non-committal.
Mhm.
I think basically, as he says it in his interview, the guy said, well, I'll let you decide that. In any case, here is a fellow that was working very closely with Naismith, and to a certain extent Fog Allen as well, so he approached both of them and said, look, we've got to do something about this. I understand you're concerned that there could be unrest or even violence if this happens. I don't think that's the case, and if you'll make a deal with me, give me 2 weeks of an integrated pool, and if there are no issues, skirmishes, violence of any kind, let's keep it that way. Just let me prove to you that it's going to be okay. They said, sure, that sounds good. So what did he do? Do you remember what he said? I went to every African American student on this campus, said, stay the hell away from the pool for 2 weeks. So there were no issues. And now I can't remember who was quoted, and he said he went to speak with Fog Allen, and Fog Allen called him a smart aleck, because Fog Allen had found out that this was his plan, and that sure there was no issues because there was no integration. But he said, you know what?